Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, and this is my imago, Scott Daly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the book club. This is a bit weird for us because we just right before we pressed play to start recording, um, we learned about the death of Chadwick Boseman, so we're kind of reeling from that live right now. Um, Not to bring everything down, but that's why we're a little discombobulated over here. So
Yeah,
um,
we're caught off guard and
yeah,
processing. So sorry about that.
yeah. So the show, that's why we're running a little bit late too, just because that was devastating. So we're obviously we're going to continue on with the book club. We're going to have some fun. But man, that was a blow. So we just wanted to bring that up before we dove into it. Anyway, let's go on with the show. I hope you're all having, news aside, I hope you're all having a wonderful Friday evening. I'm sure we know, I'm recognizing a lot of names in our chat right now, but for those of you that are attending for maybe the very first time and just saw this on YouTube and were like, what the heck is going on? Hello. We are Doof Media, and we make podcasts all about the stories that we love. We also arrange and organize this monthly book club, which now Matt will explain.
That's right. Each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all of the supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let the supporters vote, and then that decides which book we're going to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
That's right. And then we meet up on the last Friday of every month, aka right now, and chat about the book. We pull slides of important or interesting moments, and we dive deep into this book for a couple of hours. For those of you that are in chat right now, feel free to make comments, ask questions, just talk with us. We want this to be a fully interactive thing. We want to be talking back and forth with you. So that's what it is. So Matt, tell us about the book that was picked this month.
So this month, one of our patrons, Jake, exercised his Supreme Leader Doof Patreon reward to pick a book for us to cover, and Jake picked A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. And the summary of this book from Goodreads is as follows. Ambassador Mahit Desmar arrives in the center of the multi-system Tex-Kalanli Empire, only to discover that her predecessor, the previous ambassador from their small but fiercely independent mining station, has died. But no one will admit that his death wasn't an accident, or that Mahit might be next to die during a time of political instability in the highest echelons of the imperial court. Now Mahit must discover who is behind the murder, rescue herself, and save her station from Tex-Kalan's unceasing expansion, all while navigating an alien culture that is all too seductive, engaging in intrigues of her own and hiding a deadly technological secret, one that might spell the end of her station and her way of life, or rescue it from annihilation.
All right, well done, Matt. And you said all those really hard words so well. I'm so glad that you got to say Tex Kalan first, because now I can just copy you, because that was definitely how I was pronouncing it in my brain. Definitely.
Oh, good. That's good. I'm curious how you actually were.
I think it was just like.
Yeah. Yeah. Sound. Yeah.
Yes, it was sound that means thing. The Texan Empire. Exactly. Exactly. So now is the part where we kind of talk about our overall thoughts on this book. And I'm only prefacing this so we can give you guys in the audience time to let us know what your overall thoughts on this book are. Had you read this before? If you read it for the first time for the book club, what did you think of this book? Why did you enjoy it? If you enjoyed it, why did you not like it? If you didn't like it? And while those answers are coming in, Matt, tell me what you thought about A Memory Called Empire.
I enjoyed this. I actually feel like it's a book that could kind of benefit from a rereading, just because it's so, there's so much politics in it, and there's so much stuff where as you're going, you are by design a little bit confused. You're like, who
Sure.
is this? Who is this guy? I feel like the way the culture is portrayed is intentionally a little bit confusing and just kind of mysterious. And so rereading it, knowing how everything pans out, and understanding what the details of the conspiracy are, I feel like I might get
Yeah.
more out of it. But I think overall, I enjoyed the whole experience of it. I enjoyed the science fiction. I enjoyed the political intrigues. I like the characters. I like the themes, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I enjoyed this book a whole lot. I do agree that this is going to be one that is going to reward multiple reads. I think, my process, as it were, for preparing for these book clubs is I read the book. I have the book right here. I'm reading through it. If I catch something in the book that interests me as I'm reading, I have a like the note thing on my phone that'll write down the page number and like jot down like a couple words to remind me of what it is that I saw. And then after I finish the book in preparation for the show, I'll go through all 40 of those pages I've written down and like try to pare it down to 15. I had a lot of trouble doing that this time, and it's not because I did not enjoy the book. It's because like what the book is and what the book kind of reveals itself to be, it's kind of a mystery in that regard. Like it's structured as a mystery of like what happened to the former ambassador, but it's also like what is the book saying and what is the book trying to do doesn't reveal itself, I think, till the very end of it. And so there are certainly things that I wish I had, like, if I had read it knowing that, I would have jotted down this moment as something really important, but I didn't, and I didn't have time to go through the entire book again and pick some of those moments out. So like this was a challenge for me to pull slides on, and I think even more so than normal, I want to use these slides as like a jumping off point for discussion, not like I want to center all the discussions around the slides. But yeah, it's a very dense book, and I think I think the dialogue is incredible. It's very well written. Like it moves. The conversations are so great, and yeah, like what you said, what this book is saying, I think is really, really fascinating, and how it gets to what it's saying, I think, is the most interesting thing about it. So yeah, I enjoyed it overall, definitely.
Yeah, one thing that I kept thinking was like, I feel like a lot of things that I read or consume in one way or another, I feel like the political intrigues are not actually that complex. You're kind of like, okay, but in real life, political intrigues would be way more complex than this. There'd be way more moving parts. It'd be way less clear what was happening. There'd be more players involved. And this was a book where pretty quickly it was clear to me that like what they were going for was kind of the actual level of craziness and complexity and so forth that would be more realistic in an actual kind of real, empire.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Um,
Lots of good comments. Lots of people saying that they enjoyed the book. They were never bored. I agree with that. I think I was never bored, which I think is quite a compliment.
Jake S is talking about how this was the first book. He highlighted the dedication, which I don't know if you read that, Matt. This book is dedicated to anyone who has ever fallen in love with a culture that was devouring their own. Which is, I mean, pretty cues you in on what the book is going for a lot there.
I honestly kept thinking back on that repeatedly because it's sort of a thesis statement for Mahit's character, actually.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, it's so important for where we leave her by the end of the story. Yeah. Metathulu says, "I like how much the book that was shown. I like how much the book had that was shown in the peripheral way rather than as a direct focus." Yeah, it's really fascinating. This is this huge, universe spanning empire, and we really only get to see we only get to see very little of it. That's like this book is very insular and focused on the politicking of just the very, very, very center. And I thought it was really fascinating in that way. Like you feel the bigness of the world, but also it's like it feels small at the same time.
Yeah, it spends very little time being sci-fi. Like
yeah,
like it left me with this impression that like their technology might not be that much different from ours in many ways. Like they seem to have FTL engines, and they seem to have some kind of like wormhole technology, and they have space stations, and they have like holographic displays. But like beyond that, I guess the only other real important sci-fi conceit is actually the Imago. Which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, we'll talk about a lot, and what that is saying, and how that ties into our thesis of devouring empires, right? I love. Like the fascinating thing, and I think we're going to talk about this throughout the night, but one of the most fascinating things for me was we've got a protagonist here who loves the culture of the empire, who absolutely loves it. And yet our character, or our author, is trying to show us the flaws in the empire and the ways in which it's not that great. And I love the ways in which Martine does that. Like, she can't do it directly because her point of view character doesn't see it at the beginning.
Hmm.
And so the ways in which it is on the periphery, the ways in which the barbs that they have, the barbarity of their culture seen as like the most civilized culture in the world, is just kind of ignored. I
Hmm.
think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking about like the term the Overton window because it's like the Overton window on Tex Kalan is like, okay, well, everyone agrees that Tex Kalan is great and that conquest is great and that everything is in service of the ever expanding sphere of control of the Tex Kalanli Empire. We're only allowed to really talk about whether the emperor is doing a good job at serving that role. You know,
Sure,
like
sure.
it was a very like it was a very cool. Um, I almost saw that as like the coolest part about the book is like, oh, like this is a book about um, how completely differently people can see the world based on the kind of environment they're in.
Sure. Yeah. Do we want to jump right into it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's go with our first words of the book.
First words of the book. Yes. So here we go. In Tex Kalan, these things are ceaseless star charts and disembarkments. Here is all of Tex Kalanli space spread out in holograph above the strategy table on the warship Ascension's Red Harvest. 5 jump gates and 2 weeks sublight travel away from Tex Kalan's city planet capital, about to turn around and come home. The holograph is a cartographer's version of Serenity. All these glitter-pricked lights are planetary systems, and all of them are ours. This scene, some captain staring out at the holograph recreation of Empire, past the demarcated edge of the world, pick a border, pick a spoke of that great wheel that is Tex Kalan's vision of itself, and find it repeated. 100 such captains, 100 such holographs. And each and every one of those captains has led troops down into a new system, carrying all the poison gifts she can muster trade agreements and poetry, taxes and the promise of protection, black muzzled energy weapons, and the sweeping architecture of a new governor's palace built around the open, many rayed heart of a sun temple. Each and every one of those captains will do it again, render one more system into a brilliantine dot on a star chart holograph. Here is the grand sweep of civilization's paw stretched against the black between the stars, a comfort to every ship's captain when she looks out into the void and hopes not to see anything looking back. Here, in star charts, the division of the universe into empire and otherwise, into the world and not the world. Ascension's Red Harvest and her captain have one last stop before they begin their trip back to the center of their universe. In Parswanaka sector lies LaSalle Station, one fragile turning jewel, a toroid 20 miles in diameter, rotating around a central spoke, hanging in the balance point between a handy sun and its nearest useful planet. The largest of a string of mining stations that make up this small region of space, a region touched by the reaching hand of Tex Galan, but not yet subject to the weight of it.
I love this so much. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. Once again, I think this, like, we've talked about prologues, and this is technically a prelude, and how I don't normally like them, but I think this is the thing that I like about this is we have the prelude, and then we have a couple interludes throughout the course of the story. And what they actually allow us to do is kind of get out of the point of view of our protagonist a bit. And so like this is a reading of the Empire in a very kind of straightforward way. I think Jake is mentioning in the chat the poisoned gifts that each one of these captains is bringing. Like this is just like we're allowed this view of what the Empire is before we've kind of been corrupted by our protagonists' like adoration of it, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I like that phrasing.
And there's so,
Sure.
God, there's so much. It's so well written too. It's so I love the writing so much.
Yeah, right. It's a beautiful image, and the image is sort of standing in as a metaphor for what this story is and what this situation is. And
Hmm.
it's not. I admit that in the audiobook experience, I was a little bit wrong-footed by like the sudden deluge of words that I didn't understand. But
Sure,
actually,
sure.
like reading it now, I'm just like, okay, look, it's they use the word Tex Kalan 4 times in this piece that we pulled out.
Yeah.
I can't there's LaSalle Station and there's Parsbada sector. Other than that, it's not too overwhelming. And I think also it brings forth this idea that like a lot of the names are actually perfectly understandable, like Ascension's Red Harvest. I actually really like a lot of the sort of poetic language in the book, and like because Tex Kalan is this poetic society, they use poetic language for their ships and other things like that. So like
Yeah.
the ship, this starship with the warship being called Ascension's Red Harvest is such a great name, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's so great, and I mean, I love. I think it's really funny that what this book did, and we're gonna definitely talk more about this. But like, I love poetic language. I love the use of metaphor and imagery and literature to express your point, and that is what the civilization does, right? And so part of me fell in love with this empire too. You can't help but like admire the cleverness of some of it, and I think that's kind of what Martine is trying to do to you a little bit.
mhm,
And then of course like resettle you in the bare truth of it all, of what this place is and what it represents, and the horror of it. I think it's so fantastically done, and it starts here at the very beginning. I mean, I really love that, like, we start on a warship, right? I mean, like, to define who they are, we start on a star chart on a warship and then expand out from there and say we start small. We start, a star chart on a ship, and then it goes to represent everything, 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 spokes on a wheel, hundreds of warships, thousands of warships, like everywhere. And this is everything. This is everything.
mhm.
It's great. It's just so great. It's so well done. Like I was immediately swept up into this world after just these 3 paragraphs right here.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I love it. Um, uh, Miss Evil Doom in the chat pointed out that even the weird words all have like a useful noun, like empire or station or sector.
Yeah,
So like even if the weird word is nonsense to you, you still get like, okay, well, it's a sector. I don't really need to
right.
understand
There's
anything
there's
beyond
an
that.
anchor to it. Some of the
Yeah.
worst offenders of this kind of thing, they use weird words to explain weird words, and
Hmm.
then you're just lost. But yeah, everything in this has an anchor to it.
Yep.
And our protagonist is like a beautiful mix of someone that understands the culture but doesn't understand everything about it. So she can explain some of it to us, but she still needs some of it explained to her, and that really helps you too. Yeah, I just think like if you're gonna use made up nonsense words into your sci-fi or fantasy, this is the way to do it for
Hmm.
sure. Even though I cannot pronounce them all at all, and I probably won't even try to, but I think it's great. I really do.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I never heard the word pars raw and more than once, and so I didn't learn how to pronounce it
Yeah,
either.
yeah. All right. Next, we want to move on.
All right.
Let's meet our protagonist and see. And I stuffed this slide full. Wow, look at that. The city was very beautiful and very big. Mahit had been on a fair number of planets, the ones closest to Lascelles Station, that weren't completely inimical. God, why can't I talk to human life? And she was nevertheless overcome by awe. Her heart beat faster. Her palms went clammy where they gripped her harness. The city appeared exactly as it was described in Tex Kalani documents and songs, the jewel at the heart of the empire, complete with atmospheric glow. That's what looking at it is meant to make you think, said her imago. He was a faint staticky taste on the back of her tongue, a flash of gray eyes and sun-dark skin in her peripheral vision, the voice in the back of her head, but not quite her voice, someone around her age, but male and quicksilver smug, and as he excited as excited to be here as she was. She felt her mouth curve his smile, a heavier and wider thing than the muscles in her face preferred. They were new to each other. His expressions were very strong. Get out of my nervous system, you scander. Is that how you pronounce his name,
Yep,
Matt? She
you
thought at
got it.
him, gently chiding. And imago, the implanted integrated memory of one's predecessor, housed half in her neurology and half in a small ceramic and metal machine clasped to her brainstem, wasn't supposed to take over the host's nervous system unless the host consented. At the beginning of the partnership, though, consent was complicated. The version of Iskander inside her mind remembered having a body, and sometimes he used Mahit's as if it were his own. She worried about it. There was still so much space between them when they were supposed to be becoming one person. This time, though, he withdrew easily, sparking prickles, electric laughter. As you will. Show me, Mahit. I want to see it again. When she gazed down at the city again, closer now, the skyport rising to meet her skiff like a flower made of scooping nets, she let the imago look through her eyes and felt his rush of exhilaration as if it were her own. What's down there, she thought. For you. The world, said her imago, who had been ambassador from Lascelles in the city when he was still a living person and not part of a long chain of live memory. He said it in Texkalani language, which made it a tautology. The word for world and the word for the city were the same, as was the word for empire. It was impossible to specify, especially in the high imperial dialect. One had to note the context. Ugh. So there's a lot here, but
Mm-hmm.
I kept like trying to find a way to trim this, and I just loved each and every bit of it. So it was really hard to trim. Like I love that
Sure.
I love that bit at the end where we learn that the Texkalani word for world, city, and empire are all the same, and this is kind of something that the book returns to, an idea that the book returns to several times throughout it, that they have this word that means the same, and I think they also go through this again with what do you mean by you? What do you mean by we? Like
Mm-hmm.
that this language doesn't demarcate things like this in a clear way.
Yeah.
And that goes into what the culture of the place is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, to return to, I think what a point that I'm probably going to be returning to a lot. I think the book is very much about the idea that the language and, in a greater sense, the culture that you come from completely shapes how you see the world,
Mm-hmm.
how you perceive, and what the world actually is to you. And if you're from a culture that uses the same word for like our empire, our culture, our planet, our city. And if you're outside of our empire, our culture, our city, our world, then you're not of the world. You're
Yeah.
outside the world.
Yeah.
You're a barbarian,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like that does so much to explain from the beginning here, why the Texcalanli are, the way they are,
Yeah,
in so many
and
ways.
something that takes Mahit the entire book to realize is that it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter how you act. These people will always see you as other than them
Hmm.
because that's all there is to them. It's them and everyone else, and like yeah, it is very fascinating. And I mean, like we have the Imago machine here, which plays a very important role in the story in the plot, but I think thematically here this concept of past memory inhabiting current person and the way in which that memory can be co-opted or take over, like that is a perfect through line to the concept of a devouring empire, right? Like
Hmm.
you are taking the past of this place and subsuming it to your purpose.
Hmm.
That is exactly that is it's a very similar through line there that I
Yeah,
find
yeah.
really fascinating.
Ties together really well.
Hmm.
I didn't quite think of that exact angle on it, so that's cool.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, of course we very much, we dip into this idea of the imago, which becomes, you know like at first I was thinking like what an interesting, but I'm not sure if it's a relevant idea, because like she loses the imago and then she feels lonely, but then eventually it becomes a lot more plot central.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I love like I think Martine includes the imago just long enough for you to get used to its usefulness, and then
mhm,
rips it away from both the character and you to
mhm.
the point where you're like you want her to get it back almost as much as she does because like it would answer so many of your questions as well. I think it was a really clever way of like you introduce this plot element that means that like you could have most of the answers to the
Mhm.
questions you have, and then you strip it from your character in a way
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. I thought that was very clever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she keeps teasing us with it by having, a whisper, or
Hmm.
a memory bubble up now and then. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, if only, if only. Yeah. Um,
Jake, the memory is like an empire. Yeah.
for some reason, I'm imagining that in Homer Simpson's voice. The memory is like an empire. Okay. I watched too much Simpsons this week.
You watched
Um,
Simpsons this week? Okay, we can't talk about this right now.
can't talk about this right now. Yes, this is great. I mean, this is almost the beginning of the book, because
Hmm.
it's the beginning of us meeting the characters. So, um, like uh,
I
yeah.
love I love the like the look of the city. Like I mean like the fact that everything is like designed to look this way to make you feel a certain way, that's very much in line with the Tex Kalani way, you know. And this is establishing right away that our character is just in love with these people and their
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Both our character and Yuskander, or maybe it's Yuskander, I don't actually remember, but
You
yeah,
lied to me.
I don't remember if it's I don't actually remember, but I think just Yuskander is fine. But yeah, like they're both completely in love with it, and it completely warps our sense. Everything is beautiful. They've been wanting to go here for their whole lives. This is
Mm-hmm.
and not only to go to this location, but also it like they both of them are very ambitious people, or that they make up a very ambitious person who's sort of just gotten like the best job you could possibly get in the entire universe. If you're someone who's in love with Texcalan, okay, great, you get to be the Texcalanly ambassador for your
Yeah.
station. That's
Yeah.
like the coolest thing ever, and they're like so psyched about this, and it really, like we were saying a minute ago, like blinds you to all of the darkness and questionable nature of what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things I really like is we never meet Mahit as a person outside of Yiskander. Like when we meet her, she already
Mhm.
has that link set up. So like it's never clear. Like we're told that she's different, right? Like she interacts with characters that have interacted with Yiskander multiple times throughout the story, and they both notice that she's different, but we don't know how different. And there are times when they notice, hey, you're very much like him, and like so we kind of don't know how much of that is, oh, these were two people that were just like tested to be compatible with each other, and how much of that is who she is has become part of who he is. Like I think that's something she kind of rejects at times throughout the book, is like, no, we don't, like he's not like I am in control here. Like the it's like kind of like the illusion of freedom that LaSalle Station has. Or I don't even think it's an illusion of freedom, but the illusion of freedom that Tex Kalan allows them to have by saying, yes, you're free, you are not part of our empire technically, but
Mhm.
also like we are the world. So
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting the degree to which she will like argue that she's I'm me, and then yet
mm-hmm,
at the same time there's clearly a sort of vague boundary between her memory and Iskander's memory.
mm-hmm.
I also m- I'm going to say this now, even though there might be another time to say it later. Like I always thought it was funny when the Tex Kalonli start giving her a hard time about how invasive and like like it's cheating. Having this imago is like cheating,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole time they're like have a literal uh, cloud hook, like internet connection connected to their eye socket, as if that's not basically a cybernetic enhancement that's giving them just as and like this is a culture that also has these sunlit, who we don't know what they are, but they appear to be some sort of, if not literally cybernetic, then they have some like data feed that is dictating their behavior, and it's such a like it strikes us as hypocritical because we're like outside of it, but
Right.
I'm sure they would be like, well, it's not actually in your brain, so it doesn't count. And
Yeah, yeah. You
um,
can take it off, and it's
yeah,
different. It's totally different.
right, yeah.
Like they're like the importance is like being able to recite and memorize and create and all this stuff,
Mhm.
and yeah, the cloud hook is totally different from all that, right? Yeah, it is really funny. I agree. I totally agree. Like the entire conversation about how it would be cheating
Mhm.
was just,
Yeah.
yeah, is
Well,
really great.
and I think that like you could dig into the differences too, because the Imago line is a line of ancestral memory through one specific person about one specific sort of role in
Mm-hmm.
society, whereas the Cloud Hook is sort of making you an appendage of the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole different kind of,
Yeah.
it's a related but similar view of using technology to kind of make yourself fit a certain role in society.
Sure. Yeah. No, I like that comparison a lot, actually. Yeah. Well said. Well said. I
Mhm.
like that. Quantum says Lascelles stationers see the Imago machines as normal, but outsiders see how terrifying it can be. The people of the Empire see the Empire as normal, but outsiders see how terrifying. Yeah. That perfect.
Mhm.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. Move on.
Yep.
Okay. So next, predecessor is dead, and as they inspect the body late at night, 19 ads appears, also inspecting the body. I assure your excellency, 12 Azalea broke in, that I have brought my cultural liaison and her fellow Asecreta here to be witnesses to in a Lascelles ritual of personal mourning, Mahit said. You have, said 19 ads. Behind her, 3 Seagrass gave Mahit a look which clearly expressed, despite fundamental cultural differences in habitual facial expressions, a chagrined admiration of her nerve. I have, Mahit said. How does it work? 19 ads inquired, in the most formal and delicately polite mode Mahit had ever heard someone use out loud. Perhaps when Mahit received a 15-syllable poetic epithet of her own, it would involve following through on initial poor ideas. It's a vigil, she said, inventing as she went. The successor attends the body of her predecessor for a full half rotation of the station, 9 of your hours, in order to commit to memory the features of the person she will become, before those features are rendered to ash. 2 witnesses to the vigil are required, which is why I have brought along 3 Seagrass and 12 Azalea. After the vigil, the successor consumes whatever the burnt remains she desires to keep. As imaginary rituals went, it wasn't a bad one. Mahit might even have liked to have such a ceremony done as part of the integration process with Inimigo. If she ever went back to Lascelles, she might even suggest it. Not that it would have made a difference to her. Wouldn't a holograph do just as well? 19 ads inquired. Not to disparage your culture's habitus. I am merely curious. Mahit just bet she was. The physicality of the actual corpse adds verisimilitude, she said. 12 ads made a small, choked noise. Verisimilitude, he repeated. Mahit nodded with solemnity. Apparently she was trusting the Secretim after all, or at least trusting them to not break character.
So I chose this because this has like our four main characters in it, right? We
Yes.
have Mahit, we have 3 Seagrass, we have 12 Azalea, and we have 19 ads, and they're all here together in this early scene. I mean, there's a lot to like here. One of the things I like, and one of the things I really like when I was reading over this again, I really clued in on was how fucking rude they are to Mahit. Like they're constantly dismissive of her and rude. Like even if she's navigating this dangerous situation in a very clever, like well done way. Like even 12 Azalea here where he makes this small, like how many times is it written someone made a small choking noise? It's just like they're just they're just like these barbarians.
Yeah.
Like it's just incredible. It really is.
Yeah. Well, there's I don't know if you pulled this or not, but like there's a part when they're talking about like the names, like what names are okay and what names are not okay to pick,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really clear that like you basically have to have been raised in this culture to have this sense of what names are absolutely hilarious and what names are fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there's some guy later who's like 12 helicopter or something.
Yeah.
And it's apparently a perfectly fine name, I guess. But like yeah, like just the idea from their point of view, like you are hilarious and dumb if you don't understand their ridiculous culture.
What
Which
what would your name be, Matt?
um God, you can't spring this on me.
Gotta think fast there, Matt. Just look at something around your desk. Just go. Come on.
That's what I'm doing. 3 coffee cup. There we go.
That's disappointing. I'm clearly 19 microphone.
Okay, well that's a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, I do love that scene, because like she relays the name to 3 Seagrass, and she says that's hilarious, and we the reader are like, but why though? I don't get it, and like she can't even really explain it to Mahit or us.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Exactly. You could because it's culture. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I've had so many conversations with people from different cultures. I've just so many instances where you're both sort of trying to explain something interesting about your culture to them, and you're just aware that, or vice versa, and like on either side, you're just aware that the point is being missed all around.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
and but you know it's all in good fun, right? Like everyone kind of realizes that it's pointless, but it's still a fun sort of conversation to have.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
I think I agree with Miss Evil Doom that the small choked noise was 12 Azalea being shocked about Mahit lying to this incredibly powerful person. I don't even know if Mahit realizes that 19 ads is basically the um super powerful, like second in command practically.
Future emperor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
I just like, not to disparage your culture's habitus. Fuck you.
Yeah. Well,
uh,
that's another thing about this culture is they just do not give a shit about like uh, sensitivity
yeah, yeah.
toward other cultures. Other cultures are barbarians.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that Mahit recognizes very quickly is that she can use that to her advantage because yeah, like she just makes up all of this, and because because like they're so uninterested in the culture of the others, like they just totally buy into this,
Uh-huh.
like they just all totally believe it,
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah. It's great. Jake in the chat is saying that Arcady Martine said that her name would be 11 Mercury.
that's pretty good. It's pretty
Yeah,
good.
she should be a writer.
Yeah. Can we move on to the next slide now?
Yep.
So this next slide, Mahit has been there for a couple days, and she's meeting her and C3. I'm gonna say
C3PO.
C3 Seagrass PO are meeting her predecessor's old handler. During and an explosion happens, and then they're attempting to get out of the area, and something weird happens with C3. God, 3 seagrasses. I'm gonna do that so many times. She shoved her way to the front of the crowd. Mahit followed in her wake, walking hurt, a bruised and insulted ache that spread from her hip across her lower belly. 3 Seagrass went right up to the unfolded section of plaza, her nose inches from the glass, and said, 3 Seagrass, Patrician second class, Ascreta, request to transmit information ministry identification, city. A tiny section of the glass wall and her cloud hook both swarmed with words, reflecting one another, communicating. 3 Seagrass muttered something subvocal. Mahit thought it might be a string of numbers, but she wasn't quite sure. And then the glass printed a word she could read quite clearly. Granted, it said. 3 Seagrass stuck out her hand and did exactly what she told Mahit not to do. She touched the wall, as if she expected it to part like a door in front of her. The gesture was so casual, so instinctively comfortable that Mahit didn't understand when 3 Seagrass made a noise like she'd been punched and fell backward, stiff-limbed. A line of blue fire connected her outstretched fingertips to the city. Mahit caught her. She was very small. Texcalanlitism all were. But 3 Seagrass was about the size of a half-grown stationer teenager, barely coming up to Mahit's breastbone, and absurdly light for someone wearing as many layers of suiting as she was. Mahit sat on the ground, 3 Seagrass fit in her lap, stunned and breathing in ugly gasps, her eyes rolling back in her skull. The crowd backed away from them both. The city was still saying, granted, where the door wasn't. Mahit entertained a vivid and horrific fantasy of the entire artificial intelligence that kept the Jewel of the World in operation, all the sewers and elevators and every code-locked door having been programmed by whoever Yiskander had so deeply offended for the specific purposes of killing her and everyone so unlucky as to be associated with her. The concept felt absurdist. She was only one person, even if she was also the inheritor of all Yiskander's plans, and there were so many Texcalantism in the city to be accidentally hurt. So many citizens, too many real people for the Empire to sacrifice for the sake of one barbarian. And yet she was entombed in glass, her cultural liaison electrocuted for performing a routine action. Absurd possibilities made too much sense when so much had gone wrong so quickly.
It's just Texcalanlitism.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't
Um,
just immediately grok to that.
um,
Leetslum. That's
you
how
know
I
the
refer to people.
the other thing I like about the names, which just kind of jumped out to me as you were reading there, is like there's a beautiful assonance to them, like 3 Seagrass,
Mm-hmm.
12 Azalea.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's got the vzz sounds and this ee sounds, and like they're beautiful. They're like little poems in how they sound. So that's maybe another thing to. I don't think I consciously noticed that when I was listening to the audiobook, but like staring at the words, it's much
Yeah.
more obvious how they're constructed.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. Um, I love this. I mean, this is the first in several beats that I think serve to kind of rip down Three Seagrass's entire world and her
Mhm.
understanding of how it works and her place in it and her comfort in her world as it exists, because that is like Three Seagrass's arc throughout this entire thing is like this reaching this point of absolute devastation that she weeps openly, something an emotion we've seen no Texas citizen do at any point in the book. And this is like step one to getting there, right? Like she has a clear understanding of the hierarchy of the world, and this is the first time that something happens to her that like completely upsets that whole thing.
Mhm.
Like this is, she should have gotten through here. It should have worked. There is no reason why in the world, in the city, in the empire, that her, of her station, of her status, would be rejected here. And yet she's not only rejected, she's hurt. She has to go to the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's like God spit in your face, basically, like
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
far as she takes it emotionally. And I think, the book reminds us a few times, or Mahit is reminded a few times throughout the book of how, like, she's probably still on some level reeling from this experience. Like she went to the hospital and she immediately got back to work, I think, in part to sort of figure out what the hell happened here, because it was probably so deeply shocking that she couldn't just, you know, uh, rest.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and I think I like that the text here emphasizes how small they are. Like it's just this incredible contradiction in that these are the people of the world. These are the most powerful people. Anyone outside of this is not the world, and yet she's tiny. And like Mahit catches her like she's a teenager, like a child still, and cradles
Mhm.
her like a child. And yet it's this hilarious and clever contradiction in between these two people, these two
Yeah.
peoples.
Right. Yeah. Isn't it an interesting idea that like she's the barbarian and she also happens to be like a giant compared to them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I think in my mind's eye, I actually see, and maybe this is interesting because I don't think this is ever really described, but I see Mahit as being an like average looking human woman, and I see all of the Texkalan Leetslim as being like 4 feet tall. Like, is it ever actually said what the heights are?
It might be. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't
but
know.
it's funny to me that my brain, without me necessarily understanding why I was visualizing that, I was always visualizing it that way,
Yeah.
rather than visualizing them as being average height and her as being 8 feet tall.
Yeah. Well, I think we're told that 19 ads is like taller than the average um, Tex Kalani citizen
Uh huh.
Litzlim.
Uh huh.
Um, and I think she says specifically that made her look very beautiful to Mahit, but probably she looks plain and a bit odd to most of the Tex Kalani,
Hmm.
which I found really fascinating. Like again, that goes to your whole theory about like how much of this stuff is just informed by the culture you grew up in.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I mean this goes back to I think the same thing in the Expanse series, right? Where the people that lived on the station in the Expanse series were like super
Yeah.
skinny and super
Well,
tall because of the low grav stuff. Yeah.
that's what people are saying in the chat, but I'm actually not sure if there's any evidence that that's like a real thing. Is like if you put mice in orbit, do they grow bigger like?
I don't.
Like, that seems like a cool science fiction idea, but I don't know if humans actually, like, you do most of your growing at night anyway, right? When you're lying down.
I don't know,
I don't know.
man. I don't
Something to
know.
look up for later, everyone. Let's find out. I need to know whether humans actually grow taller in space because I actually always just assumed that was made up. Anyway, uh, cool. Good moment. Good kind of establishing character. What's the word? This is sort of the inciting incident from the perspective of Three Seagrass. See, I did it too.
It's really hard not to say C3 grass.
Yeah,
Just so
it's
you know, just so
see.
everyone knows, C3 grass is. If we say that, it's the same name. It's like Empire and City. It means the same.
Uh-huh. Three Seagrass down by the Three Seashore. Shall we move on?
Yes, let's do it.
So here we have Mahit taken captive by 19 ads, who she finds out knows all about her civilization's secret imago machines.
Everybody knows about
Yeah,
him.
everybody. I mean, that is funny that like everybody knows kind of everything. We find out by the end.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
actually go and I'll talk about this afterwards, but
Okay. 19 ads watched her, took in her silence, and went on. Which does not answer your question about whether anyone save me knows about your station's imago machines. I know. She was too sharp, too old. How long had you been at court? Decades. Longer than you scanned her, and half the time at least in the perilous innermost circle of the Emperor. Clearly subtle misdirection and leading questions weren't going to work. Like a knife, Mahit reminded herself, and tried to be a mirror. What did he tell you would happen to him after he died? She asked. That it would be unthinkable of Lascelles to not send the next ambassador carrying his imago. That it would be, how did he put it, an unimaginable waste. That does sound like Iskander, Mahit said dryly. Doesn't it just? Arrogant man. 19 ads sipped at her tea. You do know him then. Mahit lifted one shoulder in a shrug. Less well than I'd like, she said, which was true even if it was deceptive. And what did he tell you that the next ambassador would be like when she got to the city carrying his imago? Young, not completely informed, fluent in Texcalanli to an unusual degree for a barbarian, happy to see his friends again and get back to work. The term we'd use, Mahit said, is out of date. The Iskander I know is not the Iskander you knew. Is that the problem we're having? Mahit exhaled slowly. No. It is a very small subset of the possible problems we might have had. It is in fact my job to solve problems, Mahit Dismar, 19 ads said, but I tend to find it easier to do so when I know what they are. The problem, said Mahit, is that I don't trust you. No, Ambassador. That is your problem. Our problem is that I am still not speaking to Iskander Garvin, and that, despite his apparent death, the same unrest which is an ongoing problem in my city and which surrounded him, even and unto his more distant contacts, like 15 Engine, has surrounded you as well. It's complicated.
wow. So I pulled this for many reasons. One of the reasons was I talked at the very beginning of how much I like the sharp, clever, like tennis of the dialogue in this book, and I think this is a really good example of this. Just like is that the problem we're having? No, it is a very small set of the problems we might have had. And then the problem is I don't trust you. No, that's your problem, our problem. And it's just like the way these things are defined around what is yours, what is ours, what is mine, what is you, what is we. Like I think it's all very fascinating.
Yeah.
And I love how the dialogue moves. I love this whole conversation. Anytime Mahit was talking to 19 ads, I just was like on the edge of my seat, like reading very, very quickly because it's just so fun. It's just fun to read these two very clever people barb and kind of spar with each other.
Yeah. It's smart and snappy, and you're watching Mahit like have to figure things out and react in real time. That's a big part of the excitement is she walks into pretty much every conversation at a disadvantage and has to, trick and cajole her way through the conversation and get them to reveal things and somehow always, well, not always, but very often comes out ahead just through her own like guile in the moment. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like as we learn later in the book, 19 ads is the one responsible for killing Iskander. So it's kind of fun to reread these sections with that idea in mind and how she's kind of prodding her and she's not quite like you imagine 19 ads as being like the person like does like she know? Like is there like cuz they don't quite understand the Imago machine, right? So it's like does she remember when I killed her?
Yeah. And is she only pretending not to?
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
Right.
It's really great. I really like it.
Yeah.
Despite his apparent death is a really funny phrase coming from the person who murdered him.
Yeah. I know that was such a shocking moment too, because you're like, but she liked him. Why would she do that?
Because they're fucking crazy.
They're crazy politician. Kind of reminds me of Dune, where everyone is like super capable and super ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
It's
I
really
mean,
good.
yeah,
Yeah, Miss Evil Doom says it's great how the dynamic shifts later in the book. Yeah, it's like the power in that relationship shifts a little bit.
yeah,
And Mahit takes advantage of that.
yeah,
It's really great. I love
yeah.
this book.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I mean, I think 19 Ads is a great character
Oh yeah,
because
one
again,
of
I
my
mean,
favorites. Yeah.
she's so like strong and formidable, but there's, this one kind of single weakness that she has, which is really not even a weakness so much as just like her humanity, um, that uh, that Mahit successfully discovers and exploits.
Yeah, definitely. All right. This next slide here, tensions have continued to mount in Texcalan, and things are getting worse. And they learn about a ritual sacrifice that was done. And I want to talk about this a little bit here, Matt. Mahit thought she ought to say something, if only as an attempt to reclaim some control over the conversation, if such a thing was even possible with 19 ads and 3 seagrass both in the room. What makes a sacrifice old-fashioned? She sounded like an ignorant barbarian, but she hardly had a choice about that. Not here. Not now. Someone died, 3 Seagrass said. Someone chose to die, 19 ads corrected her. Some citizen made opening cuts from wrist to shoulder and knee to thigh and bled out in a sun temple, calling on the ever-burning stars to take them up in exchange for something they wanted. Mahit's mouth was dry. She thought of the vivid spill of 15 engines' arterial blood all over his shirt front and her face. A sacrifice for no particular reason. A Texclantism that would describe it that way. Not a death he chose, a waste of a sacrifice. What does a citizen get in exchange for their life? She asked. 3 Seagrass, whose arm was still under Mahit's fingers, said, remembered, sharp and sure. 19 ads had the same expression as she'd had when Mahit had wished aloud for a joyous reunion with her predecessor back when they had all stood in the morgue and around what was left of Iskander. That twisted of emotion that Mahit couldn't parse. The Askrita is right. Such a citizen is remembered as long as sacrifices are named in sun temples. You should attend a service, Mahit, and hear the litany of names. It'd be a cultural experience. She settled back onto the couch. All aside from its more memorial applications, dying in a temple is not in fashion. It is an extreme response to a perceived threat. So, I mean, like, this ritual sacrifice thing they're talking about here, they are so, of course, it is, as Jake is saying, foreshadowing for what exactly the Emperor does at the end of this book, which is the out of fashion taking of his own life to pass on control to 19 ads. It's just like, and I love how Mahit, like, she is disturbed by this whole thing. Like, the idea of doing this goes back to a sacrifice for no particular reason, right? But she also, just even asking these questions make her belittle herself. She sounded like an ignorant barbarian, but she hardly had a choice about that. She can't. This is still kind of early in the book where she's still like treating herself the way they treat her, because that's all she knows. Like, she's so in love with this culture that she treats herself just like they do.
Right, which is especially ironic at this moment, where the thing that she's confused by is something that we think of as barbaric.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a ritual suicide for, a ritual religious, like honestly, some of the things toward the very beginning of the book, I was thinking, oh, Texcalan is like if the Aztec Empire got starships.
Mm.
And then I pretty rapidly was like, well, that's like a massive oversimplification. But
Sure,
also at
sure.
the same time, I think that there's a grain of truth in the idea of that. Like, it is a fundamentally alien sort of bloodthirsty culture that is completely wound up around conquest and war and really like all of their norms are in support of conquest.
Yeah.
Like, there's no like that is the highest value and the highest good in their society.
Yeah.
And so like something like a blood sacrifice would make perfect sense in that sort of culture, and
Sure.
or yeah, ritual sacrifice. So anyway,
Yeah, I saw them as like an amalgamation of Aztec and Roman. Like, there's very much the Roman warmongering
Sure.
conquest stuff going on there too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
which was also an Aztec thing, but the Aztecs did so many other
yeah.
like much more unsettling things that yeah, I mean the whole idea I think it's not a coincidence actually that the Aztec and Roman empires, despite having had zero contact, um actually look sort of similar, and it's because they were societies that were entirely sort of dedicated to and functioning through the process of conquest. And um yeah, like
Hmm.
that's part of it. It's not just because the aesthetics of those cultures are being mimicked. It's because when you have a culture that's built around conquest, it ends up looking a certain way. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think Martine cleverly recognized that.
Yeah, yeah. Stelheck says that they're 95% sure that the world building is that the Industrial Revolution happened in Mesoamerica, which, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yep.
Hmm.
Cool.
Cool.
Do we want to move on?
Sure.
I don't know if we have anything else to say about this. I just love how casual they're talking about a man slicing himself open from
Yeah.
like his entire arm and her entire like it's just oh my god.
Yeah. Well, the way they're talking about, I agree. Yeah, I did want to say something along those lines. Like they're talking about it the way that like you and I would talk about like a some just latest bit of gossip coming down over Twitter or
Hmm.
whatever. It's
Right.
just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, oh yeah, I saw that. And like, but to them that is what this is.
Yeah.
It's not at all surprising or shocking or anything out of the ordinary at all. It's just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this kind of thing that happens.
It's just them doing like a yikes emoji to someone ritually sacrificing themselves.
Quote tweet with a with the sarcastic
That ain't it,
comment.
chief.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my god. Okay, that's perfect. All right, yes, let's move on that note.
All right.
Okay, so here Mahit attends a ball and witnesses an oration challenge where each member reads their composed poetry.
Oh, did I miss something? Yeah, okay, there we go. Sorry. I went ahead too far.
No worries.
You're good.
Somewhere in the middle of the second oration, an acoustic ode that simultaneously spelled out the name of the poet's hypothetical lost beloved via the opening letters of each line, and told a heart-wrenching story of his self-sacrifice to save his shipmates from a vacuum breach. Mahit had the sudden realization that she was standing in the Texcalanli court, hearing a Texcalanli poetry contest, while holding an alcoholic drink and accompanied by a witty Texcalanli friend. Everything she had ever wanted when she was 15, right here. She thought it should probably have made her feel happy instead of abruptly unreal, disconnected, depersonalized, like she was happening to someone else. The orations were good. Some of them were better than good, driving rhythms over clever internal rhyme, or an orator whose delivery of that particular Texcalanli style of half-sung, half-spoken rapid-fire chant was so exceptionally fluid. Exquisite imagery washed over Mahit in waves, and she felt nothing. Nothing aside from wishing that she could have copies of every poem written down, confined to glyphs so she could read on her own someplace quiet and silent and still. If she could just read the poems, speak them in her own voice, try out the rhythms and the cadences, find how they moved on her tongue, surely she'd feel the power of them. She always had before. She drank from her glass. 3 Seagrass had brought her some spirit distilled from a grain she didn't know. It was the pale gold color of all the swarming lights, and burned going down her throat. Damn.
Yeah, Jake has picked up on the reason I pulled this paragraph right
Yeah.
away. Like she was happening to someone else is such a powerful, charged sentence right
Yeah.
there. I
Yeah.
love
I
that
almost
so
read it
much.
wrong. It's because it's so unusual, but
Yeah,
that's what makes it good writing.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, this is really great, right? I mean, this is like our character is. I think we're almost exactly halfway into the book by now. She's been here a few days, and she's already starting to kind of recognize the truth behind the vision of what this place would be, right? That this is some place that she's always wanted to be. She's getting everything she's ever wanted, but something doesn't feel right about it. instead it feels disconnected, depersonalized, and it like she was happening to someone else. And as Miss Evil Doom is saying right now, it's because she doesn't belong here, and that is reinforced by the way everyone around her is treating her, and by the way that she has kind of internalized their cultural otherness of her to make her feel, even when she's getting everything she ever wanted, the otherness of it, the unwelcomeness of it.
Mhm.
Um,
There's yeah. There's a lot of I mean, I thought this was so cool because there's sort of two two sides to it, right? Like her love of Tex Kalan is the love of the exotic.
mhm.
It's the love of the foreign, fascinating, strange, and beautiful and fantastical thing that is the Tex Kalanli Empire. Whereas, um, for example, Three Seagrass's love of her own culture is just the baseline of her existence. It's just this is her culture. This
Right,
is
right.
this is how this is who she is. This is how she is. This is what she's done her whole life. This is just what she does. It's not something that she chose to like or that she discovered at any point. It's just what's always been the case. And so there's an interesting like this is one thing I saw in this book was that there's an exoticization happening on both sides. That Mahit exoticizes Tex Kalan, which actually distances her from it. And then the Tex Kalanli exoticize her as being the barbarian foreigner. On both sides, this
Yeah.
creates a distance.
Well, I mean, it's interesting though because I agree that the Tex Kalan lead exoticize her, but that it is mostly indifference. Like, I don't think the Tex Kalanli in general give a shit about Laselli culture at all.
Yeah.
Like, I
Uh-huh.
don't think, like, I think Three Seagrass is pointed out specifically as being an anomaly in that regard because she is interested in aliens, because she is interested in barbarians and barbarian cultures. That is not the norm within the society. Most of these people don't give a shit about any of these people. She's the different one in that.
Yeah.
And I do think that's really, really interesting because you're absolutely right that they still exoticize her culture, but it's just like I don't care, because that's one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading the book. There's a in one of those little notes, in one of those little notes, they at the beginning of the chapters when they do random things, there's a script from a Laselli movie, and in the script of the Laselli movie they mention the Imago machine,
Mm.
and the first time I read that, and my mind was like, how the fuck are these keeping these things secret if like they're writing about them in their entertainment? And then when I thought about that more, I was like, oh, I bet no Tex Kalani has like ever read or watched anything from Lascelles ever,
Hmm.
because why would they?
Yeah.
That, like, why would I take the time to absorb the barbarian art, which is so inferior to our forms of art?
Yeah. It's part of their culture to think that their culture is the best culture.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like a key part of their culture actually, because
Hmm.
it's tied into the whole idea of empire and,
Yeah.
and constant expansion, that they're like and yeah, I think that's part of their propaganda is like our culture is so great, and being Tex Kalanli is so great that we're bringing you the best possible gift we could bring you by
Hmm.
conquering you and bringing you into the empire.
Yep.
And like yeah, they have no interest in it, because what they would rather do is just take over the station.
Yeah.
And now the station is Texcalan,
Hmm.
and aren't you proud to be part of Texcalan now? And
Yeah.
now you can make good art like us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like the Imago machines are so intrinsically linked to the station culture that like I feel like you would not need to pay attention to them for that long before you were like, "Oh, of course." And I think the book kind of proves that out, because everyone that is close to these characters figures out about the Imago machines
Uh-huh.
really quickly. Like she's on in the city for like what, 2 days, and like four people know about it already.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, it's fascinating.
yeah, right.
Jake
It's
compares it to people not wanting to watch Parasite with subtitles. Perfect. Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah. Why would I watch subtitles?
yeah, right. And I mean, also the other thing I wanted to say is the idea that like she she doesn't. I don't know if she loves Texcalan as much as she thinks she does. I think she loves the idea of Texcalan. She loves
Right.
the
Right.
Texcalan from her books and her studies. I mean, just in the chat, someone mentioned. I'm sorry, I forgot who. Someone mentioned that uh, uh, Arcady Martine's PhD is on Byzantium, and like to get a PhD on Byzantium, sure you got to do a lot of reading.
Hmm.
A lot of reading about Byzantium, a lot of imagining what that would have been like back
Yeah,
then. And the
yeah.
thing is, you have no idea what Byzantium was like. And she has to know that, right? Like she has to know that no matter how much she reads about Byzantium, she will never actually know what it's like to be in Byzantium, much less to be what it would be like to be a Byzantine
Hmm.
citizen, a Byzantine citizen. Anyway,
Yes.
um, yeah, like the impossible distance between loving a culture from the outside and being in that culture. They're not even the same category of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love, like, surely she'd feel the power of them. Like, she's sitting here listening to the same kind of poems and things that she's read before, that she sat in the station longing for, and she's just not getting anything from them.
Yep.
Something's wrong here.
Yeah.
It's great. Even the drinks that she drinks don't taste right. Like, I love her disgust at the flower tasting drink, that she's just like, oh, I hate it. I hate it so much.
Uh-huh.
This thing that, for all we know, is like just a pretty important part of this culture.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's actually really funny because I
mhm.
like every time I visited a place, another country, and tried their cultural alcoholic drink, it's like, oh, this is horrible. It's always horrible, and it's not even mysterious why. It's because alcohol is horrible. You have to learn to taste whatever the specific thing is that is your culture's drink, and then it tastes okay to you.
I
Um,
always, like, as a kid, I just never understood the concept of an acquired taste.
uh
Like, especially to alcohol. To me, it's like, well, like, my dad would be drinking a beer, and like, as like a 10-year-old, he'd like let me have a sip or something, and I'd be like,
right.
that's disgusting, and he'd be like, it's an acquired taste. And my response to this is always like, doesn't that just mean you drink something you don't like until you make yourself like it?
I,
What?
I think I think it's basically true. Like
Yeah.
I mean I love scotch, and some part of me knows that scotch is objectively bad, but I love it.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like, you definitely, like, there's like, I watch people drink alcohol sometime, and like, they grimace after they
Uh,
they take a drink, and I'm like, that didn't taste good to you,
yeah,
but you like
well,
the idea of you drinking it.
brains
It's
are so interesting, aren't
yeah.
they?
Yeah. Okay, so this next part I like a whole bunch, and I want to talk about this one for a while. So this is at the same party. Mahit has kind of wandered off. She's a little bit drunk, and she finds her way into a garden. She was more sober by the time she found the garden, not dizzy or faintly ill, only buzzed, shimmering strange, and she was glad of that, both the lack of true drunkenness and the lack of total sobriety, when she realized what sort of garden it was that she had stumbled into, a tiny carved-out heart in the middle of this place. It was a room more than a garden, shaped like an enclosed bottle, a funnel that opened onto the night sky. The human wind of the city slipped down and it was gentle as it went. The air was thick with moisture that dragged at Mahit's lungs and fed the plants that climbed 3/4 of the way up the garden's walls. Deepest green and pale perfect new green, and 1,000 red flowers on vines, and sipping at those flowers, tiny birds with long beaks, hardly longer than Mahit's thumb, that floated and dived like insects would. The beat of their wings was a hum. The entire garden sang with it. She took 2 steps into the garden, her feet soundless on the moss that covered the floor, and held up her hand, wonderingly. One of the birds alighted on it, balanced on her fingertip, and took off again. She couldn't even feel its weight. It had been like a ghost. It might not have even landed. A place like this couldn't exist on a station. It couldn't exist on most planets. Even as she walked further into the strange, dim sanctuary of it, she peered upward, trying to understand how the birds didn't fly up the funnel and escape into the vaulted Texiclani's sky. It was surely warm enough out there for them, though not nearly as sweet, not so many red flowers all at once. Perhaps succor was enough to keep the whole population trapped, willingly. Succor and the fine mesh of a net. When she tilted her head exactly right at exactly the right angle, she could see it, strung silvery and near invisible at the funnel's mouth. "Why are you here?" someone said, a high voice, thin, easy with command. Mahit stopped, looking up. So this is the child emperor we see here. But
Mhm.
look at this passage, this beauty, this life, food, warmth, comfort, to where you look and say, no one, that people are here because why would you ever not want to be here? But if you angle yourself just a little bit, oh, there's the net. You're
Uh-huh.
actually trapped, and it's all an illusion.
Uh-huh.
That is the Empire. Like, this is just a beautiful microcosm of the Empire as a whole. This
I love that.
beautiful garden, this, it's teeming with life and food and warmth and happiness, and a net.
Yeah. It reminds me of the first page that we read where it was like all these great gifts, the poetry and art and you know, palaces and black muzzled energy weapons. It's like yep, there's always the I mean, this is an empire that spreads through military conquest of legions of starships. So
Yeah.
let's not forget that part.
Yeah.
It's you know, you imagine this being the kind of society that has just like constant like you know, war hymns and military parades and stuff that just utterly glorify war and never really show its horrors.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think this is great. I love the idea of the 90% clone child emperor. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's fun.
I mean, like him being here is perfect, right? He's in this beautiful garden, and that surrounded by a net. He's as trapped by this whole thing. And I mean, when you have this society that is nothing but conquest, they look at the Imago machine, and what do they see it as? They see it only through that lens of conquest, right? It is not a melding of personalities. It is not a meshing of personalities. It is not what a person borrowing from the people in the past to benefit the future. It is only the subsumption of
Hmm.
a person, and that is exactly the way the emperor looks at it with this child that he hopes to be able to consume
Hmm.
to continue his line. It's awful.
Yeah, that's a cultural clash for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Miss Evil Doom is bringing up the quote, which is sort of a bit of a refrain, if I recall correctly.
Yes. Yes.
They can do it without touching you, which I think Mahit eventually comes to believe the child emperor here is referring to the fact that he and maybe everyone is under control, even if they're never actually being
Yeah.
you know physically moved about.
Yeah, I mean that's like we at the very first opening of this book is about how the empire is reaching out for all
Hmm.
these. It's forever reaching out, and they can control you without. They don't even have to touch you. They don't even have to. They don't even like. They do not need to grab the station to control the station because they have established an order in which they are the world.
Yeah, right.
Really powerful stuff.
You could even dig into this even further and like and say like okay well the first interpretation of why the kid says why are you here would be like why are you in my sanctuary that
Hmm.
I've gone to for seclusion, but you could also assume the kid knows what's going on and knows who she is and is asking why are you here
Yeah.
like in general.
Yeah, yeah. Why did you come here?
Yeah,
Why are you in the city? Why are you in the world? Why
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Matt, why are you here? Why are you here?
Because we have a podcast.
Well,
What do you mean?
that's an easy answer.
Yeah. Um, cool. All right, next slide. Here, Mahit lines up all the known information. What could she do? It was a logic problem, or something out of classical physics. Given these constraints, what action was possible? Given that she was trapped in the heart of Palace North, with only electronic access to her own files and messages and no access at all to the pile of physical mail, which was certainly growing in size and urgency in her own office. Given that every action she took on an electronic system while here in 19 Ads' apartment would be monitored, which further constrained her ability to communicate unguardedly. Given that LaSalle Station would not know yet that the might of Texcalan was about to rush over them like the casually outflung loop of a solar flare, and had nothing like sufficient military capacity to meaningfully resist a full Texcalanly expedition. Given that her predecessor had been murdered, perhaps to allow this conquest to proceed in this direction. Given that her Imago's presence and conscious memory was malfunctioning, leaving her with only the ghosts of neurochemical feelings that didn't belong to her and flashes of memory so vivid that they were like living another life. Given that her Imago's malfunction might have been sabotage, and think about it, Mahit, let yourself really think about it, that sabotage might have taken place long before she ever arrived on the Jewel of the World, might, in fact, have originated with her own people for reasons she didn't understand. Also, given that if Mahit didn't do something, she was going to shatter out of her skin with nerves. By the rosy quartz windows, 3 Seagrass was enveloped in a little shell of infographs, murmuring sub-vocalizations to her cloud hook as if she were talking to an Imago herself. Mahit stood up. Better to take action than to be paralyzed by the thousands of shifting possibilities. Human beings walked and breathed and stepped out of cycling airlocks doors to patch thinning places on the station's skin, all without thinking about how their limbs moved, where gravity had caught them, whether the internal bellows of lung and diaphragm had inflated enough or too little. She just needed to not think, or to think, but to keep acting while she thought. Like speaking to 30 Larkspur at the banquet, there was no time for paralysis. At the very least, she needed to make contact with the cell and give them some idea of what she was dealing with.
All right. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that I love when books like that have this complex of a plot that are like there's a lot of stuff going on where they just have their character say, "Okay, let's just take a step back and let's just work through what is going on. What do I need to remember? What do I need to figure out?" And they just kind of gather it on. And I think this book does this multiple times. And I do, as a reader, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate just the book stepping back and go, let's just summarize. There's a lot going on. You got Scott, you got really wrapped up in that image of the net over the garden, and you focused on that while you were reading 30 pages. And let's just just
Yeah.
come together and summarize the mystery.
Yeah.
I think those recaps help a lot.
Whoopsie. Sorry. Touched my phone.
No.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like these are these are indispensable, especially in a twisty, turny, complicated
Yeah.
story like this. Where I mean, honestly, like as we were going into this conversation tonight, I was thinking like I still don't know who that guy was in her apartment who tried to kill her. Which I mean, in the end, not the biggest detail in the world, but like there's just so much in here, right? Like I think just dense is a perfect descriptor for this book, and so it is really important not just to I guess to tell us where we are, but also just kind of collate all the important details so that we can kind of maybe let things that are not on this list kind of slide a little bit because honestly, it doesn't really matter who that guy was or who sent him that much. I mean,
Sure.
I remember how everything ended up anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and I mean, like, I love like, I saw this as a good way to talk about the Imago's malfunction, which we see confirmed through an interlude exactly what they feared, that it was tampered with prior to it even being installed in her, right? And I like this as like a lot of what I think the book is trying to do is isolate Mahit, and so like she's not part of this culture, but her own people are suspected of having like betrayed her as well.
yeah,
And it really serves to isolate her in this world. Like she's not, and I think the end of the book as she's returning home is like, I don't even know if I can call this home though. I don't know. A lot of this is her trying to figure, as a person who her entire life has been obsessed with another culture that she's now visited and went like, eh. She's had to figure out, okay, who am I now? What do I do? Where is home to me? Where do I belong? And I think part of having all this complex political stuff, because I think in stories like this, there's a tendency to kind of flatten everything, that like we look at LaSalle as just like not a collection of peoples with varying wants and needs and schemes, but just like there's LaSalle culture, and then there's Tex Kalani culture, and then that's but like I love that this book complicates it, and like there's bargaining and maneuvering and politicking on both sides of this whole thing.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then of course every individual that we meet is just an individual, right? I mean,
Sure,
I
sure.
thought like the whole subplot, which is basically just like um 12 Azalea and 3 Seagrass are friends. That's the name of the subplot. I thought that was great because it's just like, okay, like as weird and alien as this culture can be sometimes, like here are just two people who are friends, and that's sort of a human universal, honestly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just be that it's a beautiful, complicated, unique friendship. But it's not unique because they're Tex Kalanli. It's just unique because everyone is unique because they're both unique people.
Sure.
And so yeah, that that particular I appreciated that a lot. Where we're speaking about uh, cultures and individuals, and it's like, well, the book was very careful to actually make all of the individuals actually be individuals.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're totally right. That's great. All right. Do we want to move on now?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. In this next slide, we learn what Yaskander promised to the Emperor. Mahit needed to hear him say it, to be sure, to get out the endless loops of her conjecture. What did Yaskander promise you? The schematics to Lascelles' Imago machines, the Emperor said, quite easily, like he was discussing the prices for electrical power, and several for immediate Texacalanly use, in exchange for what I would guarantee for which I would guarantee the independent sovereignty of Lascelles Station for as long as my dynasty holds the empire. I thought it was a rather clever bargain on his part. It was, in fact, clever, for as long as his dynasty holds the empire, a series of Imago emperors would be one single dynasty, one single man, endlessly repeated, if Sixth Direction really thought that the Imago process was iterative instead of compilatory, and thus Lascelles technology bought Lascelles independence in perpetuity, and Sixth Direction would escape the illness which was killing him, and live again in a body unmarked by age. Iskander, Mahit thought, reaching, you must have been so self-satisfied when you came up with the terms. Perhaps, Sixth Direction went on, you'd like to add some of your Lascelles psychological therapists. I suspect their contributions to Tex Kalani theories of mind might be quite fascinating. How much of Lascelles did he want to take and devour and transform into something that wasn't Lascelles at all, but Tex Kalan? If he wasn't the Emperor, she might have slapped him. If he wasn't the Emperor, she might have laughed and asked what exactly the Tex Kalanli theory of mind involved. How wide is the concept of you? But he was the Emperor, grammatically and existentially, and he thought of all 14 generations of Lascelles Imago lines as something that could contribute to Tex Kalan, the Empire, the world, the same word, benefiting equally. Whew. She gonna slap that Emperor. She gonna
Yeah,
slap him.
it's funny. I think for some reason I didn't like grasp the first, when I first read this in the audiobook, like the the thematic weight of this idea that yeah, he's taking this thing. It's not just technology to her, it's
Mm.
culture to her. It's 14 generations of deep culture, and
Yeah,
he's going to
yeah,
take it and pervert it into this necromancy.
yeah.
um, this with this terror, as she sees it at least, and I think as we are sort of brought to see it through her eyes, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is just evil. She's gonna just like take this kid and download her brain into download his brain into it and kill the kid basically, functionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's a great moment. Um, I don't know why I didn't process it. I think it's just because it's a complicated scene. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. I think because this is in Tex Kalan society, like as people are pointing out, grammatically and
Existentially,
existentially is just such a perfect. It's such a perfect turn of phrase. He
yeah,
was the emperor grammatically and existentially, and yeah, I mean, like I, the idea that she is so disgusted by him and by all of this. Like he is just a product of his culture almost, right? Like he's just
yeah.
kind of doing what they've been trained to do or what the desire to do. Like he even says his motivation here is to perpetuate peace.
Hmm.
Now I don't know. We might not like believe that exactly, but that is what he reports to her as his motivation. 80 years of peace that he wants to perpetuate.
Hmm.
Um, but to do it, he just has to take this thing that is the cultural touchstone of these people and destroy it and pervert it to suit the empire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating because in so many ways he is like the perfect perfect emperor for this society.
Hmm.
Like he is willing to sacrifice his life in this dramatic theatrical Teixeqalanli way, um, to serve his people, to serve what he sees as the needs of the empire. I thought it was interesting that, I mean, I take him at his word when he says that he wants peace, and like peace doesn't seem very Teixeqalan, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think that maybe another thing that the book is playing with is this idea that different people within a culture can disagree about what the culture is really about.
sure.
Like he can have his interpretation and say like, look, like our greatness doesn't depend on. Actually, I'm frankly not clear on whether he meant peace in the sense of no more conquest or peace in the sense of no more internal strife. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
actually not clear on that.
I mean, that's the
um,
thing about it is like that it is a word that is defined based on your own like what import tense you attach to it, right? So like
mhm,
as people are saying in chat, yeah, peace within the world is different than peace outside of it. If
yeah.
if the Teixeqalanli Empire is the world, why do you give a shit about anything outside of it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is absolutely no internal strife,
Yeah.
peace within society. Yeah,
Right. So he's not against conquest at all. Yeah.
no,
That
no,
and I sort of I was unclear on that, but I suspected that that was the case.
yeah, yeah,
That's funny. I love the name Six Direction because at first it didn't make sense, and then I realized like, well, it's like the six axes in three-dimensional space where, you know, you have forward, backward, left, right, up and down.
sure,
It's if you're looking at that star chart from the first page of the book, there are six directions to go in, you know.
yeah, yeah.
So it's six directions outward conquesting. It's the perfect name for an emperor of Teixeqalan.
It's
I love it.
beautifully poetic. Yep, yep. What is the name of the kid again? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
Ugh, I had this. It's okay. Someone in chat will tell us. I'm certain of it. Do we want to move on to the next slide?
Sure.
Um,
This is mine, right?
yeah, I keep like accidentally hitting buttons, and it's not. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So, and now we learn who was responsible for Yaskander's death. Ambassador, Tin Pearl said, the word drawn out slow like he was coaxing her. Have you perhaps considered that there is a reason for that omission? There were all sorts of other subjects we could profitably spend our time on right now. Perhaps we might discuss hypnotron hip hydro hydroponic nutrition factors compared between small and large populations. We have so much to learn from each other, Lascelles and Texcalan. It was inconvenient, Mahit thought, being furious. It dulled the edges of her vocabulary, and yet here she was, just as furious as she'd been in 8 Loop's office. She looked him straight in the face. Ten Pearl, I'd like to know why my predecessor died under your care. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was an accusation, just not a direct one. Three Seagrass had put her hand on Mahit's knee, warning and warm. Ten Pearl sighed, a little resigned exhalation as if he was preparing to do something unpleasant and necessary, like disposing of rotten food. Ambassador Agavin's activities and proposals were unsuitable. He implied, over an entirely civilized meal in which he was given multiple opportunities to renege, that he was prepared at any moment to flood the Texcalanli markets with technology which would upset the functioning of our very society, and that he seemed to have suborned or influenced our glorious and brilliant imperial majesty. It was my responsibility as Minister of Science to deal with the threat he represented. So you killed him, Three Seagrass said, fascinated. Ten Pearl regarded Three Seagrass evenly. Given the circuit's current situation, he said, with an encompassing little gesture toward Mahit, as if to include and circumscribe her in the general state of Texcalanli diplomatic affairs, and then to dismiss her with them. I see little reason to deny that. While he was dying, I did intervene medically. If Ambassador Dismar would like to bring that up during an inquiry into medical malpractice, I am sure she could begin such an inquiry at the judiciary. Sorry, I had to sneeze that whole time.
You made it through though. I'm proud of you.
And now
I'm
I don't
proud
have
of
to
you.
sneeze anymore. All it did was just screw up my reading.
That's how it goes. That's how
Yeah.
it goes. So yeah, this is the murder mystery solved, right? Not entirely because we learn it is not Ten Pearl that origin Ten Pearl, as he says here, did not save him, but it was 19 ads who poisoned him. It's just Tempearl just kind of chilled and was like, "Yeah, we're good, we're good. I'm not gonna save him." But I thought it was interesting how like this like what happened to Ysander is kind of the mystery that drives forward that portion of the plot, and it was just like, yeah, we did it. Like they're kind of so indifferent because they know that it doesn't matter. Like it's just so to these people who done it at this point, it doesn't matter anymore. And
Yeah.
like it's a big deal to our main character, but to none of the like like they're not even trying to hide it. Like one of the first times she gets to talk to Ten Pearl, she just asks him directly and he just admits it. And
Yeah.
that's the ball game.
Right. Because it seems like everyone except the Emperor sees this as a kind of sacrilege.
Right,
Um,
right.
so really their attitude is like literally anyone might have done it because we all see it as having been a
Right.
thing that should have been prevented. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then the fascinating like I didn't pull a slide on it, but where 19 ads like wanted to kill her again and was going to do it and then changed her mind at like the very very last second,
Yeah.
because of her personal attachment to her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
True humanity. Yep.
as Evil Doom is saying, yeah, everyone knew the whodunit the whole time. Literally everyone, except for 3 Seagrass and 12 Azalea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone else knew. The Emperor knew. Everyone they talked to knew. It's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's almost funny that the Emperor knew because the Emperor didn't do anything about it. He's just
Yeah.
like, shit.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because like there was this romance between them, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was, and like he's like these people are so weird. Like
Uh-huh.
it's just like he doesn't seem like he's not happy about it, but like
Yeah.
he
He didn't
doesn't.
punish
Yeah,
anyone for it.
I guess when you're operating like kind of outside of what is proper, you can't punish someone for trying to stop you from doing that, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're operating outside of the morality of your culture,
Yeah.
you can't punish someone for trying to prevent you from doing that underhandedly.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, he's like the perfect Texcalan emperor. And so
Hmm.
he even recognizes, like, well, what you did was in service to your conception of the greater good of the empire. And so, good job, even though you did the opposite of what I wanted. It's just fascinating,
Yeah,
fascinating
yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah. What a contradiction. Love it, love it. All right. So let's talk about the part of the book where Mahit links up again with her old buddy Iskander, and it gets real trippy. I'm gonna read this part here, but we're gonna talk about this whole thing for a while. So she gets the device, and they go on an adventure to the seedy part of town, and have some under the table brain surgery to get this thing in her head. LaSalle Station has a long tradition of psychotherapy because if it didn't, everyone on board would have decompensated into identity crisis a long time ago. In the earliest stages of integration with an imago, during the most difficult part where the two personalities are sorting out what is valuable about the imago structure and what should be discarded, what is necessary for the host personality to keep as self-identity, and what can be edited, written over, given up, in those early stages, what a person is supposed to do is consider a choice. A small choice, an unimportant one, where the imago and the host choose the same way. To focus on that choice as a still place, a conflictless heart, something to build out from. Mahit, says one of the Iskanders. She thinks it's the young one, her imago, the one who is more than half her already. Mahit, remember how you felt when you first read Pseudo 13 Rivers expansion history, and you came to the description of the triple sunrises you can see when you're hanging in LaSalle Station's Lagrange Point, and you thought, at last, there are words for how I feel, and they aren't even in my language. Yes, Mahit says. Yes, she does. That ache, longing, and a violent sort of self-hatred that only made the longing sharper. I felt that way. We felt that way. Both of their voices almost the same, electric fire in her nerves, the sweetness of being known.
It is a really fun and surprisingly long sequence as they're doing their sort of integration vision quest.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed it. I found it surprising. Like I didn't think we were gonna do that. I thought we were gonna like pop back into the sort of fast paced action, but we take this nice little breather in her head.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I like so going back to our Imago machine as metaphor for empire, right? Memory called empire.
Yeah.
Two personalities, two cultures are sorting out what is valuable and what should be discarded, what is necessary for the host, for the subsumed culture, and what can be edited, written over, given up. The thing you're supposed to do in those moments is find some common ground. Like, let's expand this out to two cultures. Find some common ground, some commonality between the two of you, something that is important and fundamental that you share, and hold on to that as part of this integration process. And that is not what the Tex Kalanli culture does at all, right?
Yeah.
That is not what they're interested in doing. They're not interested in integrating culture. They are interested in expanding culture,
Yeah.
expanding their culture.
Yeah. It's interesting because they don't really use the word compromise, but it is about compromise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the I mean, I think it says it very clearly right here where it says what is necessary for the host personality to keep as self-identity and what can be edited, written over, given up. Like
Mm-hmm.
that by itself is such a uh terrifying statement, right? Like
Sure,
you
sure.
got to decide we're going to do this procedure to you, and yeah, you can keep some of your personality, but you know you're going to have to pick some stuff to give up because it's just not going to jive with the new person that you're bringing into your head. You're going to have to get rid of it, and but you know you can keep the stuff that just happens to overlap with the personality that you're getting.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and but it is compromise. It actually kind of reminds me of you know just relationships between people where
Sure, sure.
there's kind of constant negotiation and compromise because no one really comes to you know even a situation as sort of mundane as like roommates. You'll have you'll have different things that you care about.
Yeah, yeah. What you value, what is so valuable that it is considered necessary to defining who you are and the things that you're willing to give up. Yeah, but that is not that is not what Texcalan does at all. That is and as Jake is saying, Six Direction looks at this machine and sees it only through his viewpoint, only as conquest, only as we're not going to have this melding of the minds. We're not going to have this compromise. We're not going to have this thing where you retain the parts of yourself that are necessary to self-identify. No, you will be me now. And it breaks my heart here that the thing that Mahit, the core identifying personality factor of Mahit is this feeling of longing and a violent sort of self-hatred that she had, right? That the core personality trait of herself that she uses to kind of bond with these people is reading this book written in another culture and having a phrase and having words to a feeling that she had felt before, and but like you will never achieve, like it will always be longing, like you will never be part of that, like self-hate, like that a longing and violent sort of self-hatred that only made the longing sharper, and they bond on the fact that they have this that core to who they are, or at least the core is this hatred, this
Yeah,
this disgust at what they are not.
this complicated alienation
Yeah,
and longing for a thing that they kind of know they can never have.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, that's who this Gestalt person is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's awful. It's really
Yeah,
awful.
it's I find it relatable though. I mean, I've never been in the position of, you know, being in love with a specific culture that was not my culture, but we all have things that we kind of love and know that we can never have or know that we
Yeah,
can never be, you know.
yeah, totally.
Or yeah,
Like like
I relate to it anyway.
like hair.
Or like being actually good at a musical instrument.
Oh come on! You make all our intros. You're good.
Yeah, but every musician
Stop with the self hatred.
musicians are, I'm pretty sure, like the originating group for imposter syndrome. Like that's
Sure, sure.
they invented it. And so you notice I said they and not we. Um,
This self hatred, Matt. It's gotta go. It's gotta go.
All right, it's not going to be allowed in our compromise.
No, no, I refuse. You have to throw that away.
Okay. All right.
Let's talk about some radical poetry.
All right.
Oh, baby. This is your slide, right? I think it is.
Uh, uh yep, yep. See, that's the integration has gone so far that I remember having read the slide that you just read. All right. So Mahit and Three Seagrass composed radical poetry together. Yep. Mahit had written poetry in text Kalanli before. She'd written it alone in her capsule room on the cell, scribbling in notebooks at age 17, pretending she could imitate Pseudo 13 River or One Skyhook or any of the other great poets, framing her own unformed ideas in language that didn't belong to her twice over. She was too barbarian and too young. Now, sitting with her head bent next to three seagrasses, adjusting scansion and carefully selecting which classical allusions to foreground, she thought, poetry is for the desperate and for people who have grown old enough to have something to say. Grown old enough or lived through enough incomprehensible experiences. Perhaps she was old enough for poetry now. She had 3 lives inside her and a death. When she wasn't careful, she remembered that death too much, her breath coming shorter and shorter until she reminded Iskander that he was neither dying now nor in charge of her autonomic nervous system. Three Seagrass, for her part, composed verse like putting on a tailored suit jacket, a process she knew how to make look good that made her look good in return. Her mental library of glyphs and illusions was vast, and Mahit envied it viciously. If only she had been raised here, had spent her whole life immersed, she could turn phrases from pedestrian to resonant in a minute's work, too. The poem they'd come up with was not long. It couldn't be. It needed to move quickly through the open news feeds, be quotable, and express itself clearly. Clearly to the populace, and then in a more nuanced, layered fashion to 19 ads and her staff. Mahit had begun it with an image she knew Five Agate would recognize. Five Agate had been there. And Five Agate, clever and loyal and trained in introspection, would know how desperate Mahit truly was, and tell her Zwazwakat everything. In the soft hands of a child, even a map of the stars can withstand forces that pull and crack. Gravity persists. Continuity persists. Uncalloused fingers walk orbital paths, but I am drowning in a sea of flowers, in violet foam, in the fog of war.
I cut off the end of the poem. I'm sorry.
The last line about
The spear.
in is it released? I am a spear in the hands of the sun.
Yeah,
Is that it?
yeah, yeah.
Did I actually have it memorized correctly?
You might have. I think. I don't know. So I like this a lot because like I don't get poetry, Matt. We've talked about this before on different shows that I just don't get poetry. But like I want to get poetry. Like I want to like poetry. I feel like I should like poetry and I want to be a person who reads and appreciates poetry and can even write poetry, but I just can't. I just like I need to like take time and train myself in it and understand it and that kind of thing. And I just haven't done that. And so like I Mahit as this person. What is interesting to me is that she gives Three Seagrass like all the credit for this, like because first of all, this is her culture. This is the thing she was born into and trained into from birth. But she does do some of it herself, right? Like I mean, it says Mahit had begun with an image she knew Five Agate would recognize. That was a decision she made in the formation of the poetry. Now Three Seagrass helped her put it together, of course, but I do like how even at the end when people are like reading this poem and talking about how effective this poem was and how the spear in the hands of the sun has become like a rallying cry, Mahit is like, well, it was all Three Seagrass, and just kind of pushes it. Like she doesn't feel like she can take credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, right. I think it's still that alienation.
Mm-hmm.
Where I mean, obviously she's contributing here, but
Mm-hmm.
she can't really feel like she's actually part of it.
Sure.
It's the whole sort of conquest dynamic where it's like it's not almost like she's not giving, but Texalon is taking, something like that. I don't know. Yeah, no, I love poetry. I I almost kind of avoid it because it's like too powerful for me. Like I'm such a labile person when it comes to art that really good poetry, I'll just be like blown over by it
Sure,
and be
sure.
fixated on it. I'm like, oh, but I need to get work done today. I can't be thinking about poetry. Um, yeah, I love poetry. We should do uh poetry cast.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should just like, as Jake saying in chat, Scott takes a poetry crash course. I would love to just like force myself to study it and grow to appreciate how to analyze and understand it. I really would. I really would, because I do think it's so powerful. And I mean, a lot of that's what this book is about. This is a culture kind of built around the power of art, of poetry, to inspire and control and consume.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd really like it.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, it's a way to study word choice and like the power of just the exact perfect word in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Totally, totally. Yeah,
I've heard advice that novelists should practice writing poetry and poets should practice writing longer stories because novelists can use the practice in picking precise words and poets can use the practice in trying to sort of think bigger picture.
yeah, yeah. I like it. All right, we're almost at the end here. How are we doing on time?
Pretty good.
We're doing okay.
Doing okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as civil war breaks out around the city, Mahit and Three Seagrass share a tender moment. This was a terrible idea. This was lovely. It was the nicest thing that had happened to her in hours, in days. Three Seagrass kissed like she'd made a thorough study of the practice, and Mahit was glad of it, glad that she'd done it, glad of the distraction from everything else. They broke apart. Three Seagrass's eyes, inches from hers, were very wide and very dark and red at the corners where she'd wept. Petal was always right about me, she said. Mahit tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear and let her talk. I do like aliens, barbarians, anything new, anything different. But I also... If I'd met you at court, Mahit, if you were one of us, I'd have wanted to do just that just the same. What she was saying was exquisite, a balm and a comfort, and horrible at the same time. If you were one of us, I would want you just the same. And Mahit wanted simultaneously to climb back inside her mouth and shove her out of her lap. She wasn't Tex Kalani. She hardly knew anymore, except that she wasn't Tex Kalani and wouldn't be no matter how many lovely Ascritum climbed into her arms, tear-stained, wanting to be held after sacrificing nearly everything she was for Mahit's sake. I'm glad you did, she managed, because it had been sweet. Come here, let me. Her hands in the Three Seagrass's hair on the narrow channel of her spine, holding her. They didn't kiss again, just breathed together in time, until the hollow projection screen chimed 15 minutes and changed, beginning to show a series of aerial images of the city, what someone might see from their vast height of the Sun Temple on top of Palace North, the eyes of the Emperor opening up. Oh my gosh. This is everything to me. I mean, like,
Yeah.
throughout the entire book, and it's actually, I really want to read this book, because I think there are moments throughout this book, again and again and again, where Three Seagrass reminds us that she sees Mahit as the other. And
Mhm.
even though, like, it's so fascinating, she is caring about her, she loves her, she's sticking her neck out for her, she saves her, she almost dies trying to save her. And yet, even in this moment, she can't help but point out that you are not one of us. You
Mhm.
will never be one of us. And it's like I don't care about that though. Like
Mhm.
I promise I don't care, but I still needed to
Yeah.
take the time to point that out.
Right. It's still the first words out of my mouth when we stop kissing, and
Yeah.
it's really heartbreaking. Like it's a really perfectly heartbreaking way for this to go down. And like even the word. I mean, I love the word choice here, where she said, "I'm glad you did." She managed because it had been sweet,
Mhm.
and that the had been really jumps out to me there, where
Yeah.
it's like they kissed once and basically it's over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know it here, and then you realize it is true as the story wraps up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just it was a moment where they were able to provide something nice for each other, but they're not really a
Yeah.
match.
It's because I mean, it is like, it is a compliment, right? Like, it is saying, if I'd met you at court, like, if I love you, or
Mhm,
I'm attracted to you, I want to be with you, and it's not just because you're other,
mhm,
like, but it's the way in which you can be culturally insensitive without even realizing you're doing it, because you're
mhm.
just living your life through the perspective through which you were raised.
Yeah.
And like, she does honestly think this was just a very nice, sweet compliment to say. And yes, even Mahit acknowledges, yeah, yeah, it was.
Mhm.
It was.
Yeah, it's
Um
funny because like the words like aliens and barbarians
mhm.
in
Mhm.
English have such obviously negative connotations,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whereas for Tex Kalonli, barbarian, I mean, just like the word barbarian, I'm pretty sure just meant you don't speak Latin. Isn't that true? That's what I learned anyway. I learned
I
that the
don't.
word barbarian just meant you don't speak Latin, but the connotation of it has become barbarians are, the
Uncultured, uncivilized, yeah.
yeah, the wild people of the hills. And that's, I mean, there's kind of a similar thing happening here where you can believe that all three seagrass means is people who were not born here, but to Mahit's ears, she's being called barbarian. She's
Again.
being called savage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
And that is when she truly realizes that even amongst the person who was closest with her, even amongst the person who was helping her the most, who understood her the most, who cared about her the most, even to this person, she will never be one of them. And okay,
hmm
okay,
yep, yeah, yep.
you're all
Yeah,
alone.
I think this is very necessary. I think to understanding her decision at the end too,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
think without this moment, I would have thought that was bad. Like I would have been like, what? Why would she do it? Like this is this is a culmination of her sense of alienation and realizing that she's never really going to feel at home here.
So Stelhex is giving a little more information on your birth. That's hilarious. I mean, it's
Like,
awful, but
I'm
it's
I'm gonna
hilarious.
read it. This Selhex says barbarian is a sort of onomatopoeia. Bar was Roman for blah blah blah, which is how barbarians sounded to the Romans.
That's so fucking Roman. That's so Roman. Oh my gosh, these people.
Oh, cultures. Cultures are so funny.
They are. Oh my gosh. All right, this is the last slide of the book, Matt.
Okay.
So let's do it.
So Mahit bargains with the Empire for safety and decides to head home. Are you planning to annex my station to Texcalan? Mahit asked. 19 ads laughed, a brutal, shoulder-shaking sound. No, no, Stars. I hardly have time. I hardly have time for anything. You're safe, Mahit. You and LaSalle Station can be as much of an independent republic as you'd like. But that's not what I asked. I asked what you wanted. In the pool, a long-legged bird had alighted, white-feathered, long-beaked, 2 feet high at the shoulder at least. As it stepped, it didn't disturb the flowers. Its great feet slipped between them and rose again, dripping. Mahit didn't know the word for the kind of bird it was. Ibis, maybe, or egret. There were a lot of kinds of birds in Texcalanli, and one word for bird in Stationer. There'd been more once. They didn't need more than that now. The one stood for the concept. She could ask for, oh, an appointment to a university, a place in a poetry salon, a Texcalanli title, a Texcalanli name to go with it, money, fame, adulation. She could ask for absolutely nothing and remain in service, the ambassador from LaSalle, and answer mail and sing a song in Texcalanli pubs that once she'd written some of the words to a long time ago. Nothing the Empire touched would remain hers. Very little was hers already. Your brilliance, said Mihit Dismar. Please send me home while I still want to go. You keep surprising me, said 19 Ads. Are you sure? Mahit said, no, which is why I want you to send me home. I'm not sure. What are you doing? Trying to see who we are, what is left of us, who we might be now. So,
Uh,
yes, filled with conflict, realizing that a big part of her, maybe most of her, wants to stay here, wants to try to soak in and
Yeah.
becomes Escalante, but also knows that she actually can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Even still at the end, even still after everything she's gone through, part of her still wants it and
mhm.
wants to strive for it and reach for it.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe she could enjoy that life. I mean,
Yeah,
I
maybe.
think that Iskander genuinely enjoyed the court intrigues for the whatever 15, 20 years of life that he spent on this planet. I don't
Yeah.
think that he necessarily ever felt like he was of this place, but
Yeah.
it's still a life, right?
Yeah. Miss Evil Doom and Stelhex are both pointing out the reason I wanted to pull this, which is the beautiful metaphor of the bird, right? She's watching this bird and points out in Stationer they only have one word for bird, just
Hmm.
like and it stands for the concept. It stands for all bird. Bird just is all birds, just
Uh-huh.
like city is empire is
Uh-huh.
world. And I think it defines the difference between these two cultures in stark difference
Uh-huh.
that they will never be part of each other. Like she will never truly be part of it. And
Yeah,
I love that. I love
sure.
that so much.
Especially coming here almost at the end, which forms a symmetry with the introduction of the idea that um, that world
Mm-hmm.
and city and empire are the same word.
Mm-hmm.
I love it when books do that. Of
Yeah.
course, this isn't exactly the end, right? There's another little bit where it's basically her returning home and realizing that it's not that's kind of not really home either
Yeah.
anymore.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And she's doesn't know where she's gonna go. And
Yeah.
there will be a sequel. So I don't know if she's gonna be in it, but there is a book coming out next year, I believe, called A Desolation Called Peace, which is charged title, just like this one. Yeah, I mean, this is it's so beautifully written. It's so beautifully written, and I love it so much. I love rereading it. That's the thing is like when I pulled this slide, I read it aloud to myself, and I was
Yeah.
just like, this is beautiful. This is beautiful.
This is one of my favorite things about book club because there's something about reading it with my human eyes instead of listening to it that just really hammers in how beautiful the language is because I think when you're audiobook and stuff like this just passes through your head
Yeah.
in a very very different way.
I think
Um,
that's true when you're reading too. I think that's just true. Like when you're just reading a book, you're just kind of in it. And
mhm,
I am a lot of times paying less attention to the individual word choices, to the individual sentence construction. There's occasional moments where like something will jump out at me and I'll be like, oh my God, yeah, fuck, that was amazing. But for
mhm,
the most part, it's not until I really sit back and start to study it that kind of stuff jumps out at me because like in just the process of reading a book, I don't pick up that stuff as much. But yeah, through this discussion, that's where it comes, and that's
mhm.
what I love about this so much. I'm right there with you.
Yep. All right, and
What a
that's the
book.
last slide.
What a
Yeah,
book.
it was
Holy
great.
crap.
Yeah, I don't have time for this, but I want to buy the paper copy and read the paper copy because I feel like there's value to be had in that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like this is going to be a book that I revisit someday.
Hmm.
I don't know when I'm going to have time for it, but I would like to dive back into this thing and read it again. Maybe right before the sequel comes out. Are you? I guess that's a good question, Matt. Are you going to check out the sequel when it does come out?
Yeah, probably.
I don't
I,
know. I have to look up this author. I don't know if she's written anything else. She's young. Well, she's not young. She's our age, which I call young because
yeah,
I want to
because
believe that still.
I'm not yet at the point when I can admit that that's not true.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, this is her debut novel.
God damn it. Hugo Award for Best Novel for her
Uh,
debut novel. You know what, Scott? I quit.
what's wrong, Matt?
I quit.
Well, I mean, to be fair, have you written a novel yet?
Um, I mean, sort of.
You got to finish that novel if you expect to win a Hugo for it.
All right. All right. Well, does anybody else have any final comments about this book before we exit today's discussion? Questions, comments? concerns, observations, things we didn't talk about?
I feel like there's a lot we didn't talk about. And part of that's my struggle with which slides to pull and which not. Um, but I do think we encapsulated a lot of what the book was trying to do, and I think what the book is saying is so fascinating and so interesting, and I think we got there. So I'm happy with the conversation we had for sure.
Hmm.
While the questions are coming in, let's go ahead and jump ahead to what next month's book is going to be. How about that, Matt?
Sounds good.
So next month's book, like a last minute, stole the vote by one vote, is Susanna Clark's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is a pretty long book, Matt. So I think just as a heads up to everyone, you're probably going to want to start this one sooner than you normally would in the month cycle. I think this is a pretty long book. So that's going to be next month's book. We will be meeting on Friday, September 25th at 9:30 p.m. Central Time to talk all about this novel. And if you have any questions about it, or you want us to talk about anything specific, there's the email address and Twitter account for that. Are any questions coming in while I do this? I wasn't paying attention.
No, people are having reactions to the Jonathan Strange pick that I don't understand the reactions.
Well, so I think the reactions are the book that was winning throughout almost all of the week was an Ursula K. Le Guin book, The Dispossessed, which is supposed to be one of the best books she's written and one of the best books ever. So I think people are a little bit disappointed that that didn't win.
Well, we'll just have to put that on the list for next month.
Yeah, well, it's the runner-up, so it will definitely be on the list for next month for sure.
Tringard says there are a lot of thoughts on loneliness in this book.
Yeah.
And there certainly are. Yeah, I found, I mean, that was definitely a relatable part of it where, again, like I said earlier, like even if you can't really relate to like Mahit's specific situation vis-a-vis, feeling like an alien in an alien culture, you can certainly empathize with loneliness. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like just having traveled quite a bit and lived in foreign countries, I could connect with a lot of these feelings, even though I wasn't necessarily like feeling this kind of jealousy for the culture that I was immersed in.
Yeah.
You still feel like all of these people around me are part of something and I'm not part of it. I'm far more alone than I would be if I were just alone sitting in a restaurant in America. I'm sitting in a restaurant in Beijing.
Sure.
That's 10,000 times more alone.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we like the trying to think of the way to say this. Like, you and I are both white dudes living in the United States of America, and so like our cultural viewpoint is considered the default, So like at least if we remain in this country,
Yeah.
we are like we are the default. We are the assumed.
Well,
and so
yeah, here it is. Yes.
Yes. That's what I mean here. So like as long as I'm staying in America, I don't experience that feeling very often. But I mean, I do know that there are plenty of people that live in this country that feel that constantly. That feel like that they are surrounded by people who they do not feel a part of.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons why I think that everyone should not only travel, but everyone should live abroad for at least a period of time at some point in their lives, because you can't really see your own I mean, this is going to sound a bit conceited, but I think you can't really see your own country until you've lived in other countries.
Sure. Yeah.
And even then, it's not like you ever really get that original seeing mentality of how other people see your country, but you get a lot closer to it, and you see both. Actually, I think I would say you see both the good and the bad of your own country more clearly and more thoroughly if you have experience being the foreigner.
Yeah.
So so a lot of that stuff spoke to me about this book. It's not something that really came up in our conversation much, just because so much of this specific character, I think, was focused on this idea of like her loving Texcalan and wishing she could be part of Texcalan. That's not something I ever really experienced, but I definitely experienced the just being alone and not feeling like you fit in with the culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think we love to use the phrase melting pot in this country. but I don't actually know how accurate that is. It's not like our cultures are like melding together. It's like they exist in clumps within the same pot and don't often, or not as often as they should, actually interact with each other. I think we are pretty, even in the United States, are pretty siphoned off by race or gender or class, whatever you want to call it.
Or even just like what Anglo group colonized your part of the continent originally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of which there were like multiple distinct groups that now actually still have powerful impacts on what's happening in 2020.
Yeah.
Um, um,
So David asks, is there anything to be said thematically about the alien threat, which we basically did not talk about at all, because I don't know is my answer to that, my short answer to that question. I mean, I do think like in a culture in which you are convinced that you are everything and everything, like that the idea of an existential threat outside of you is almost incomprehensible, because that's not the world, and so that the book is very tangential with who these aliens are, what they are, what they want, what's happening. I assume this is stuff that's going to be covered closer in the sequel, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know anything about them. Like I think at one point somebody says like they can't think, we can't talk to them.
Yeah,
and like that's almost perfectly calculated to be terrifying to any human, where you're like, okay, that's all we got.
yeah, right.
All that's left is fighting. They might as well be animals, right? And it's like, well, I mean, we don't know that. All we know is we can't talk to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I wonder how true that is versus that's all perception, right? Like I think that represents a super big threat to Tex Kalani culture as well, because like you can't consume them
yeah,
and transform them
yeah,
in that case.
yeah. You can't make them Texcalanly
Yeah,
if they are completely not the same thing as you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, is there an implication that the Texcalanli Empire actually encompasses some literal, actual aliens?
I think so. Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, but like everybody we see in this book are humans.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think they did reference like literal like non-humanoid species at some point.
Yeah, but we don't learn much about
Nah.
which again I think is fun, just because like none of these characters care about that. These are not these characters just care about politics and intrigue. None of them are scientists. They're all secretas, They're all,
we didn't talk about it, but I the one science officer who's actually like interested in information exchange between the Tex Kalani and the stationers. Is like the first person that actually thinks about what a mutual exchange of information could be. No one else seems to actually care about that.
Yeah. That, I mean, we only meet maybe a couple of like scientist types in the whole thing.
Sure. All right. Is that
I think that's it.
Miss Evil Doom says they have treaties with aliens, but she doesn't think there are actual aliens in the Empire, which makes sense because I would assume these people would be super racist.
That sounds familiar to me. So,
yeah,
makes sense.
All right, cool. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in live. Once again, this was a great conversation. I love having these conversations. Thank you, Jake, for making us read this book. Not a book that I knew existed before we started this, before I opened it up, and it was fun kind of learning what this book was as I was reading it. I really enjoyed it. And for those that are listening to the podcast after the fact, we hope that you will be able to make it next month as we talk about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's probably going to be another fun conversation, so come hang out with us live next month.
Yeah. If you like what we do here at Doof Media and want to see more of it, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating just $1 a month or whatever else you can afford, and you'll get access to our Discord server as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover in next month's book club,
Yeah.
which it sounds from the chatter in the chat channel is a very valuable commodity.
Yeah, because like if there was just like 2 more of you,
Uh-huh.
the Dispossessed would have won.
Exactly.
Just 2.
Yep. So go check that out.
Not that I'm not excited to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I've heard good things. I'm excited to read it.
I mean, if that many people voted for it, it surely got something to recommend it.
Sure. Yeah. All right, folks, if you have any questions or comments about this month's book, next month's book, or any of the books that we have covered or anything else, just want to reach out to us and talk to us, you can always find us on Twitter at doofmedia, or you can send us an email at doofmedia@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you all next month. Boop. I feel like 2 hours and 11 minutes is like, we're gonna hit that every time. I don't know why it's 11 minutes in particular.
I feel like it's between 11 and 13 a weird amount of the time.
Yeah.
That was great. That was one of those conversations where I went from liking the book to loving the book due to the conversation that we had.
Yeah, totally. I feel like the last 2 months have been that for me. And that's like one of my favorite things in the world. That if talking about a book makes me love the book more, that's awesome. That's awesome.
I think what's cool and what I've noticed, or what I noticed repeatedly, is like I will have had some sort of subconscious flicker of a thought while reading it, but like that's it. And then it's only when we have this conversation that I like remember I had that thought and then try to articulate it and then develop it from that flicker into like an actual insight. And like I just like I would I would have had so many fewer interesting thoughts if we didn't have these conversations.
Yeah, there is something about sitting live in front of a camera and a microphone promising to talk about something for 2 hours that makes you get your shit together.
Yeah.
It's always fun. It's always very fun. Oh, you got your wife reading Harry August? That's awesome. I enjoyed that book a whole lot.
Me too. That's very fun.
Yeah. Got to read all of Claire North's books too. Shit, so many books. So many books.
By all these young, extremely young authors. So young.
It's gonna be okay, Matt. It's gonna be okay. You're a podcaster, not a novelist.
No, don't say that.
You could be both. Look at Lindsay Ellis.
I know.
First, you got to do video essays though, and you gotta get 1 million YouTube subs. Where are you on that?
I'm I'm halfway there in log space.
All right, folks. I think we're gonna go ahead and cut it here. It's getting a little late, and I'm getting sleepy. Thanks again for hanging out. That was a lot of fun, and hope to see everyone around this time next month.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. Let's finish our books. I agree.
Yeah. Right. But first, Matt, finish that audio project you're working on.
Okay, fine.
That's our priority.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks.